What happened during an interview that immediately made you realize you wouldn't take the job, no matter how much they offered you? 3 or 4 people who interviewed me spent the entire time talking about how bad the company was and why I really don't want the job. The 4th was the CEO. His story was different. I didn't take the job. I tried getting a job as a telemarketer once. The interviewer had me go into another room and call her, and she would pretend to be a person I'm trying to get money from. I started into the script and she said, "Oh, but I'm just a poor college student with no money." Even though I knew she was just pretending, I still felt terrible. I knew that I could never do that work in real life. I told her that my coming there was a bad idea and I had to leave. The amount of lies discovered during the interview itself. They tell you one thing online and in emails, only to see something different when you show up and go through the interview. If there was already that much lying and falsehood seen during the interview, no telling how much worse it actually can be. Could understand why the person left. Ask me if I would be willing to take a 3-month deferment while under a probationary period. If after 3 months they didn't like me, they'd let me go and give me a check for $0.10 on the dollar for every $/HR worked. If they kept me, I'd get a check for all my hours, plus a bonus of $500 for office supplies, but I could only buy out of their selected catalog. I almost laughed in her face. They called me back for a 5th interview after that. I had enough and told them it was getting a bit much and I'll take a pass. When she started explaining that my role in handling payments would involve depositing client payments into my own personal account before transferring it to the company. I may be a dumbass, but I didn't fall off the turnip truck yesterday. I was told the person I would be supporting as an executive assistant was on his 3rd wife, he has 6 kids, and that I should include the wife in certain decisions so that she doesn't feel insecure being the 3rd wife and all. Ain't nobody got time for 3rd wife insecurity drama. It wasn't an interview, but a taster session where I had to work there for 3 hours then make my decision. A lot of the hardware didn't work, the guy training me was away and had to train me over a video call, so whenever anything went wrong I was fucked, and he would loudly sigh every time I needed something explaining. Because how dare someone need something explained to them on their first job. I interviewed at a no excuses charter school. They gave a scenario where a student comes into class and doesn't have his homework done. He says it's because he spent the previous night in the because his brother was shot. School policy is that unfinished homework is a mandatory detention. I could not, in good conscience, answer that question the way they wanted. Stupid interview games. The dickheads put me at a low table with a low chair, placed water in a carafe with an empty glass, all just out of reach, so that I'd have to stand and reach for it, and then interviewed me as a panel of 6 employees sitting at a tall table with tall chairs. The questions were all more about my character than my skills. The whole thing was so obviously staged to make me feel uncomfortable. An interview is a conversation, not an interrogation. Treat it like an interrogation, and I'm fucking out. It's a clear sign of a toxic workplace. I've yet to see an exception to this rule. I interviewed for a job that was ostensibly a tech role, updating and maintaining the company's website. Midway through this whole long interview, they asked me if I'm comfortable with sales, because they said half the role would be cold calling customers and there'd be minimum monthly sales targets to meet. I'm one of the most introverted people to ever introvert, so no, I would not be comfortable with that. I wouldn't have even applied for the job if they'd been at all explicit in the listing about it having a significant sales/customer contact component. They didn't call me back, and I was relieved. It was a low-paying retail job, but I've been interviewed at the same time as someone else. The issue I had with this is that it pits 2 people against each other, and it becomes incredibly awkward. I was interviewing against a woman who had lost her job and was talking about supporting her kids. I felt like I had to make a stronger case saying that I didn't know how I'd afford college without the job. If an interviewer doesn't have time for 2 separate interviews, then just walk out, because things will only get worse. After the job interview they said they will call me in 1 week. A month has passed and I still didn't get a call, so I decided to call them myself. They said, "Oh yay, we remember you, yay. I'm sorry about that, we completely forgot to call you back. We already found someone better." Turns out that someone then turned the job down, and so they contacted me again to see if I was still interested after 2 months. I said no thanks. I already got a job. I went to interview for an entry-level marketing position in the film industry. 2 hours in, the boss slipped in that I wouldn't be paid for the first few months while they trained me. It was a full-time job. He also wanted me to start immediately that day using my personal laptop. I made up an excuse and left shortly after. This was during a phone screen rather than an interview. Time frame was 1997, during the height of the com boom. I'm a programmer. The screener told me that they were a fast-paced company, and I asked for some clarification on what exactly that meant. After some evasive answers, I asked more directly what kind of hours people worked, and found out that many people were working 60+ hours a week. I politely declined. The company did have an IPO in early 1999 that could have been lucrative for me, but I had an 18-month-old daughter and another on the way. I was changing jobs to be able to spend more time with them, not less. I feel very good about that decision. Wasn't the interview pressy, but I caught a glimpse of a whiteboard in ours that had a bullet point list that seemed to be things to talk about to convince people to join the company, and one of the items was not a cult. The application was vague, and when I showed up to the interview, I realized why. It was a MLM. My brother once had an interview for a cooking position at a local restaurant. He walked in and immediately ran into a female employee who was crying and yelling, "Fuck you, John." John was the guy who interviewed him. The interview was uneventful, except for at the very end, when he asked, "Is there anything I need to know about you now, before you start, that would be a problem if it came out later?" Me, entirely confused, like what? "Oh, I don't know, if you have a criminal record for example, or if you're gay." Asked if I had a family first interview. They don't want someone who has to leave on time to take care of kids, or is interested in their own life. They interviewed me for the job they thought I should have, not the job I applied for. The CEO of the company asked us, yes, it was a group interview, to make a vow. He said that every time we made a mistake, his accountants would calculate how much money our mistake cost the company. He asked for us to promise that any time this happened, we would voluntarily choose to pay the company for what they determined their lost revenue was. One of the interview questions was, would I be willing to immediately fire a single mother who depended on the company health insurance for her register being off 50 cents? I'm a senior level programmer and the company was only offering 2 weeks vacation, non-negotiable. Lol, hell no. Hiring manager asked me if I could start before day X because they have a monthly hiring plan. The company wasn't expanding. I came from a gig as a junior developer. I interviewed for a developer role. I got in, and their API was slow, their website basically a joke, and most of their reporting stuff was barely functional. I thought, wow, I can really have purpose here. Why does it feel like I'm overqualified for this role though? It's just basic programming stuff, and no advanced math. They seemed super excited, and I said, so what's the compensation range for this role? And their response was, this band can go up to $36,000 for the right candidate, and that made it all make sense. They never have had a developer, because that's below entry level rates. I talked to a company who offered $125K a year. On the next phone call I was told he had no right to offer that, and dropped it a significant amount. So I hung up in the middle of my talking to them in a very calm voice. It's an old trick, they never believe you'll hang up while you're talking calmly. They were casually discussing firing someone who had just left another job to join this company during my onboarding interview. I said no thanks shortly afterwards. Back in 2008, I saw a posting on Craigslist for a writing job. During the interview, it became clear to me that the actual job was to create and maintain hundreds of fake email accounts and post fake reviews for products I never used. I hadn't heard of this concept before. Hey, it was 2008, so I just chuckled at one point and blurted out, "Isn't that illegal though?" Thankfully I never heard back from them. I was interviewing at a nationally known survey company back in the early 90s. I was a database administrator and they were planning on migrating their data from flat files to a database. The last guy I interviewed with would have been my direct supervisor. One of the things he said in the interview was that he didn't think they really needed a database. Database administrators were in short supply back then, and you could essentially write your own ticket. There was no way I was going to waste time trying to work with someone who would fight the very concept of my job description. The first step interviewer said that the people interviewing me in the next phase don't like ties. She said someone was disqualified during the second phase because they disregarded her advice and showed up to the interview in a tie. What the fuck? I didn't respond to a request for a second interview. He asked me if I was a crier because I looked like a crier. I was fresh out of law school and just told him I didn't think it would be a good fit when he offered me the job. If someone asked me that now, I would walk out of the interview. I had an interview back decades ago, in my early 20s. Interview with the hiring manager went great, was introduced to the team. We sat around talking for a while. Manager goes, "Hey, you should meet our director." We walk over to an office. He walks me in and introduces me. Director turns his chair around to say hi, takes one look at me, and literally pulled his legs up into his chair and hugged them like a child trying not to be hit. I don't know who I reminded him of, or what terrible thing they did to him, but I knew instantly I wouldn't get that job. The managing partner, attorney, interviewing me for a paralegal position noted that I have a paralegal degree and said, "I don't care about that. I think it's a bullshit degree." Proceeded to brag about how he designed the office. Ghosted me, which I assume means he hired someone else, and called me a month later with an offer when they didn't work out. Too many red flags for me. They took issue with me saying I wanted to watch my daughter grow up when they asked how much overtime I was willing to work. Yes, it was sarcastic, and I said it in a way I knew would torpedo the interview. I was insulted by the question. I'm not a slave. I once had an interview where I spent the majority of the day there. They took me around and introduced me to everyone, about 30-ish people, had a group lunch, etc. While everyone was very nice and the work seemed interesting, I noticed everyone looked very tired. At one point during the day, I was making small talk with the manager and the topic of travel came up. He then mentioned it had been years since he last took a vacation. After some questioning, I soon gathered that not taking vacations was pretty common there. I happened to run into the same manager about a year later, and he was happy to report that, while he hadn't taken a vacation yet, he actually had one booked. He still looked exhausted. Mandatory 12-hour shifts 6 days a week at Ashley Furniture. I made a joke about being multilingual, but that Japanese wouldn't be useful for this job. There were near no Japanese speakers. Where the job was, the interviewer insisted I speak Japanese to this Chinese woman, who was in the building, to prove I could speak it. Then when I refused, because the lady was Chinese, he laughed and said he knew I was lying. I walked out. I asked about the company's family medical leave policy. My current company pays for extended leave in these circumstances, and the manager kind of shrugged, said they have no official policy other than state law. They can't fire you, and everyone gets some paid sick days. Then he sounded really proud when he said they allow people to donate/pull sick days for people as needed, and that their team did this when an employee had cancer. I work in healthcare, on the administration side of things, and the CEO told me they had a hard time finding employees because no one wants to work anymore. Maybe no one wants to work for you, or people are changing careers after experiencing extreme burnout. That has happened to healthcare providers over the last 2.5 years. I'm a programmer. Interviewer asked me to demonstrate my skills by solving a real-life coding work problem they were having. I asked them if they had real life money to pay me. That didn't go over very well. I advised them I have tens of thousands of free code examples on my website and GitHub. I pointed where they could find my free work on my resume and left. I talked to a company that wanted a profession of undying loyalty to take an internship. They said that was the only thing they want an interviewee to state after the fact. It was really strange. I'm very happy and want to stick with my very corporate job. But that is a earned thing involving time and relationships with people lasting more than a decade. I had multiple interviews with the company. In the end, they said they needed someone with more experience, and once I have more experience, to give them a call back. No thanks. If you rely on other companies to train your staff, that is a hard pass from my end. The company called me back several months later asking if I was still interested. I said no. Law firm. They said in terms of work/life balance, this job is more of a work balance. Newspaper attention. They said people would call in to cancel their paper subscription like 12 years ago, and my job would be to get them to keep it. Lol, this was when smartphones and Wi-Fi were really taking off.